I decided to try making a wood sign from scrap wood for my wedding. So I spent a bunch of time sanding this that I didn't film, but that's by far the longest part, is just sanding if you're using scrap wood. And then I printed a quote in the font and the size that I wanted to fit on the sign. And I cut each word individually so that I could align it how I wanted. This black paper is carbon tracing paper. I had some from embroidery, but it's pretty affordable to pick up on Amazon. And you put the darker side of the carbon paper down, and then you put your paper over it. And I'm just using a marker with the cap on it here. The goal is just to press all over where the font is so that it will transfer carbon from that paper onto the wood. As you can see here, the first word in particular did not show up very dark. So on the remaining 3 lines of this quote, I did press harder and go over the words multiple times just to make sure that I was like really transferring that carbon onto the wood more effectively. It's easier to do when you have 2 hands. I only had 1 hand because I was holding my phone. But yeah, you'll see that this second line showed up a lot darker just because I pushed harder. And so I kept doing that for the remaining part of the quote. And I used a pencil here that came with my wood burning kit. I had just assumed that this would not negatively impact the way that this would burn because it did come with the wood burning kit. But this actually did change the way that the portions that I burned. So in hindsight, if I could go back, I would not have used this pencil. So I just heated up the wood burning pen and started tracing. And this part is really fun. I was surprised at how much I enjoyed this. It definitely has a learning curve, and I definitely was imperfect at this because I had basically no experience with this. The angle that you use, the amount of pressure you use, how long you stay on each portion, all impacts the way that the burn will show up. And because I did have some pencil and some carbon portions of this, it did burn differently. The portions where the pencil were, they kind of got a little bit watery, almost like it was like boiling a tiny bit on the surface of the wood, and it kind of smeared a little bit, which is why I wouldn't recommend using that pencil now that I have a little bit more experience with it. But yeah, I just tried different like dragging techniques, and it's kind of about trying to let the pen linger in each spot for roughly the same amount of time, because the longer you linger in any given spot, the more thoroughly it will burn. So you just want to kind of get it as even as you can. My pen came with several different tips. This one, if you use it on the side, can let you do more angled, or if you do it flat, is a little bit wider. So I used different angles at different times to get the different thicknesses that I wanted for this particular font. If you look at the end of that P right there, you can see it looks kind of smeared. That is what was happening from the areas where I used the pencil. So, and up here again on the top of this A, I had used pencil, and so it smeared again. But this was the end result from the burning itself. And of course you could leave it like this, but I did want to stain it, so I just bought some wood stain. I read online that a lot of people like using rags to rub in the stain. I really didn't like how this felt on my hands, and I also just felt like it wasn't covering very evenly. Like some areas were grabbing a lot of stain and others weren't. So I decided to try out a paintbrush, and I like that a lot better. I'm sure it's just everybody's going to have their own preference, but I decided to keep using the paintbrush for the remaining of this sign. And I did 2 to 3 coats on all of this. It does start to dry pretty quickly, so it was a little hard sometimes to know if I was on layer 3 or layer 4. And different parts of the wood do still grab more stain than others, like where there's knots in the wood and things like that. But I was kind of, going for a rustic look. I like that it's imperfect, so I wasn't overly worried about any of that. To hold the sign together, we took a piece of pallet wood and cut it in half to make it thinner. I say we, but this is my fiance. I had grabbed a saw and then he just comes out and like, can I do that for you? I'm pretty klutzy, so he would rather not see me use a saw, I guess. Then we cut it so that it wasn't too long. I had this silicone glue laying around that said it worked on wood. I decided to try this and thought if it didn't work, I would buy actual wood glue, but this did work. It's recommended to use a zigzag pattern, so that's what I did. And then laid each board on there and secured it. The instructions said I could use clamps, but I didn't have clamps, so I just put a bunch of weights on it and let it sit for 24 hours to dry. And it did work. It combined the sign into one solid piece.